I drove through a red light at 70 miles an hour.
To get to the next 9 is very, very, very difficult.
It's less a technology issue and more of a public policy issue.
We got to have a new definition of safety across industry and government.
I don't rely on anything when I make my decisions left or right.
Things don't happen instantly.
It's got to be better than a distracted human on their phone.
Policymakers should set up the bar, and the bar should be what is good enough.
Welcome to another episode of the Venture Capital Podcast. Today, we are talking about AI and autonomy and vehicles and the future of transportation. With me and John today, we are pleased to have two awesome guests. First is Gabe Klein, who led U.S. Joint Office of Energy and Transportation under President Joe Biden, driving America's push towards electrification and clean mobility. He served as Transportation Commissioner in Chicago and Washington, D.C., where he launched two of the nation's first large-scale bike share systems, expanded protected bike lanes, and prioritized people-first urban design. Earlier in his career, Gabe was VP at Zipcar, National Director at Bikes USA, and later founded CityFi, advising governments and companies on building smarter, more sustainable cities. Thanks for joining us, Gabe. Our other guest is Alexei Andreev. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Is that right?
Yeah, perfect.
Our other guest is Alexei Andreev, who is co-founder and managing director at AutoTech Ventures, where he invests in hard science startups in both hardware and software, with a focus on companies building durable advantages through deep IP and strong network effects. Previously, Alexei led the Silicon Valley office of Harris & Harris Group, and before that worked with Draper Fisher Jurvetson on investments in advanced manufacturing, quantum computing, and alternative energy. He holds a PhD in solid-state physics from the Moscow Steel and Alloys Institute and an MBA from Stanford, and has served on the boards of several companies, including D-Wave Systems, Adesto Technologies, and others. Alexei brings a sharp perspective at the intersection of deep tech, venture capital, and the future of innovation. Thanks for joining us, Alexei.
Thank you for having us.
So to kick things off, I would like to maybe just talk about what is the current state from both of your perspectives on AI and autonomy for vehicles. You've got, it's one of those things that we've been promised for the last, I feel like, 15 years, and yet still don't fully have. And I'm curious, maybe the first question is why we don't have full autonomy vehicles today?
Well, I can give you my perspective. I've been following AVs for, I guess, about 15 years pretty closely. In my book, Startup City, I actually have a picture out at Google X before it was Waymo with the Panda car, and Sergey was taking us for rides in it back in the day. And I was super impressed with that vehicle back then. I think Waymo is definitely at the front of the pack. I think what everybody's realized is getting to, 95 to 99% autonomy. You can do that in a certain period of time. Then getting to 99.99987, whatever, it just takes a lot longer. That perfection is hard. And, you have people like Elon Musk saying, look, we can just use vision. It's as good as a human. The thing is, it's got to be way better than a human, particularly these days, a distracted human with a smartphone. So I think none of us should be surprised. I got the same thing with the charging stations at the U.S. Joint Office. Like, well, you just passed the bill at the end of 21. You spun up the Joint Office in 22. Why don't we have chargers on the ground in 24? I'm like, well, these are construction projects, and you got to do RFPs, and right, like things just take time. But we as Americans are used to like instant overnight. And then the last thing I would say is, it reminds me a bit of smartphones. Like, I had a smartphone in 2002. It was a Siemens. It had a big screen. It gave me headaches when I would hold it up to my head for hours. And then the iPhone came in 07 and it changed everything, right? So just because something takes a while doesn't mean it's not going to be revolutionary and turn the world upside down. It's just it things don't happen instantly. And technology, as we all know, is very iterative.
So I want to go a little bit deeper on that, and I think you make some great points. And part of the reason I'm excited for this podcast today, particularly around this, is we've got Alexei, who is, a little bit more on the investor and deep tech side of things, and you're a little bit more on the public policy, which I think both of those things need to align for autonomy to really, really take off. You mentioned that it's got to be better than humans, but like you even admitted, right, that it's got to be better than a distracted human on their phone. And so, why is that? Why does it have to be better, like substantially better? Why can't it just be a little bit better, right? Because if it's just a little bit better, we would drive down all kinds of accidents and other issues. We'd all be better off, even if it's not like 100% perfect. And maybe my assumption is that it's less a technology issue and more of a public policy issue that makes that a requirement.
Yeah, Peter, I can jump in, or we can switch
Yeah,
back and
please.
forth. And if you don't mind, I will geek out a little bit. I agree with you that policymakers should set up the bar, and the bar should be what is good enough. And whether it's 99%, 99.9, 99.999, how many nines do you need? Which will satisfy public opinion and policymakers and legislative bodies that something is safe, because there's nothing like 100% safe device or 100% safe therapeutics or 100% safe anything. It's never 100% safe. So how many nines do you need? And so it will go back to Gabe, and I'm sure he will provide additional insights. But as a former technologist who turned to the dark side, I think your listeners might be interested to discuss why getting those extra nines are so difficult, specifically for autonomous drive. And so when people describe different processes, stochastic processes, random processes, when we're flipping coins, uh, something which is typically used is a normal distribution. So if the processes don't feel each other, they're independent. We flip enough coins, we'll get a normal distribution. And for normal distributions, we know what the standard deviations is, how many examples we need to test, and situations to explore in order to give you 2 sigma, 3 sigma, 4 sigma, 6 sigma, etc. The challenge with autonomous driving, it is one of so-called strongly correlated systems. And so what you do impacts everybody else around an intersection. And what people do around the intersection impacts you and your perception, your path planning, your collision avoidance. And these pieces talk to each other all the time. You turn left, somebody else will react one way. You turn right, somebody else will react in a different way. And so for those so-called strongly correlated systems, we're dealing with fat chaos. It's not like normal distributions dropping very quickly. And after 1,000 samples, you have a pretty good understanding of how this particular system behaves. For thick tails, you add more examples and more examples and more examples. And you still cannot tell whether it's 2 sigma, 3 sigma, or 6 sigma, because the tails are not getting narrower with time. And I think it represents the fundamental challenge. And that's why we all hoped to have autonomy in 5 years, and then in 10 years, and in 15 years, because to get to the next 9 is very, very, very difficult and very expensive, given the very fundamental nature of the problem. It's a system with memory, and it's a system with strong correlation. And those systems, you just don't know how many times you need to test against different scenarios to get a sufficient level of confidence that the system behaves as needed. And unfortunately, we're dealing with something very complicated from the mathematical standpoint. And Gabe, Now passing to you. I geeked out.
Yes, well, I love it, and I'm not a tech geek, but I so appreciate what you're saying because that's okay. That's the tech side. The good news is we have a technological leader, right? And I'm a little biased. I advised Waymo for about 5 years through my company CDI. But I've ridden in a lot of vehicles from Singapore to California, and I've seen the differences. I've experienced it as just a human being, as well as an investor at Fontanales Partners, as well as a public policy person. And when you have a leader like that, that's already basically achieved what we need to achieve for the most part. With 25 million miles driven, according to Swiss Re insurance paper I was reading, and 2 liability claims, we're already significantly better than a human. And that's where we need to be. It's never going to be perfect because you're going to have those edge cases that happen. I remember I was in Singapore and I was in an autonomy vehicle and a wild boar walked up in front of us. And the car was totally confused. And I was talking to the guy in the back seat on the laptop. He's like, holy shit, we've never seen a wild boar. Like, but the beauty of it is every new autonomy vehicle then the next day knew what a wild boar was, right? Because instantly the entire system soaks up that data. The other thing I would say is the definition of safety is a problem. You alluded to this, Alexei, that you've got in the US, we think a lot about the safety of the people in the vehicle. You even look at the NHTSA, crash tests. It's also, as you alluded to, the people outside of the vehicle, the cyclist, the pedestrian. You remember the cruise incident in San Francisco, right? So who ultimately decides what's safe? It's not the government. Honestly, the federal government is not doing that. It's the consumer. It's public opinion. Crews shut down, and it wasn't because the government shut them down. They shut themselves down. If you're not safe, nobody's going to ride in your vehicle. It's not like a tech system where you can put out an alpha and a beta and iterate and test and hope for the best. Like just imagine in 82, when the airlines were deregulated, that a company came along, unnamed company, we'll call it Slate or Tesla or whatever, and said, hey, we're just going to put planes in the sky. And look, they're not completely tested to be 100% safe or 99.99, but we're going to learn as we go. And it's going to be in revenue service. I don't think that would fly, no pun intended, with the public, right? So there's the definition of safety. We got to have a new definition of safety across industry and government. And there's liability. You saw the full self-driving liability claim last week or 2 weeks ago. 30% of the liability got applied to Tesla. The $1 billion settlement, their part is $332 million. The insurance companies play a very important role here, and the trial lawyers. So yes, there's a tech side, but there's the reality of what happens on the ground. And am I going to put my daughter, my 11-year-old daughter, who I'd love to put in a robotaxi to get to school with all of her friends, in a Tesla with full self-driving? When my personal experience, I drove through a red light at 70 miles an hour with both of them in the back with full self-driving on. No, I'm not going to do it. Would I put them in a Waymo? In a second. So you tell me what's safe.
Well, there's
And I
also
think,
this
Peter,
question. Oh, go for it.
I know we're supposed to discuss public road autonomy. I think at some point we may spend a couple of minutes on off-road autonomy and specialty autonomy applications. Because if you think about agricultural autonomy, driving tractors in the field, if you think about bulldozers, if you think about hauling trucks, if you think about all sorts of off-road autonomous applications, due to simplified driving environment, you don't have children playing around, you don't have traffic lights, you can stop and start at any point. Plus, there's a very clear ROI for the end user, partially because of liability insurance and litigation every time you have an accident. So mining companies, agriculture, they want to get all the people away from on construction site. You don't want to have people on construction site. Your insurance goes down, your litigation costs go down. I think we should not be forgetting about those use cases of autonomy as well. And I think what Waymo accomplished, and I think what Tesla is accomplishing there, and Cruise as well, they gave birth to a lot of off-road autonomy startups which learned from the best and managed to adopt highway autonomy technology for smaller, niche, but much closer to revenue and much closer to clear ROI use cases. So maybe we can spend some time down the line expanding what autonomy is and say
Yeah.
public road, non-public road, off-road, on-road, da 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 da.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be great, especially when we talk about like where the opportunities, because my impression is that there are a lot of really interesting investment opportunities in that sector. Um, the one thing I was going to mention about liability that I think is another kind of wrinkle on this that's challenging is safety for who. So, like, whose safety is optimized in these vehicles? Is it the person in the vehicle? Is it the other person's vehicle? Is it the pedestrian on the street? Which I think adds like a whole other level of figuring out what safety really means. But um, I guess maybe the question then, Gabe, is like, why do we not have a standard for safety? What's holding us back there?
It's a really great question. And first of all, I'll say people have very particular feelings, particularly industry people, about this. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about autonomous vehicles, just street safety. And I've seen people go from being like advocates for having as little regulation as possible and like, look, every man or woman or kid for themselves, to being real advocates for street safety for pedestrians when somebody in their family gets hit, right? The reason we don't have a definition for safety is because you look at a organization like NHTSA, they're focused on the vehicle, right? The physical vehicle. Now, it is interesting. You look at like a vehicle like the Cybertruck, which is not legal in most places in Europe, but it is legal here. And the reason is that it's not safe. It's not considered safe in Europe. I shouldn't say, it is or isn't, but it's not considered safe for users outside of the vehicle because of the combination of weight, the angular aspect. Somebody gets hit at like 12 miles an hour, they're dead, right? Um, Getting back to AVs though, so there's the physical aspect, there's the tech stack. We don't have a rating system for the tech stack, really. You know, like you can have somebody from Neuro or Zoox or Elon from Tesla, Takeda from Waymo. They could all get on a panel and argue about whose system is better, but it's up to us to decide. I think there's a real opportunity for a rating system. I think we should have it. I think it should be made up of like the people that are rating this should be people from industry, uh, perhaps government. Maybe it's maintained by a third party, but like we have Consumer Reports, we have IIHS. Like there are organizations out there. Why don't we have a rating system? I think it's a matter of time, and I'm an advocate for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Any thoughts, Alexei?
Yeah, yeah. The couple of factoids. Factoid number one: we keep hearing rumors that some of the best engineers from Cruise are now joining insurance companies because insurance companies figure out they will need to underwrite insurance for autonomous vehicles, and there is not enough statistical data to produce actuarial tables. You need to start offering insurance now, and the only way to do it is to, as Gabe mentioned, to qualify and certify the quality of a tech stack. And so former developers are now creating those virtual test rooms and test intersection and test facilities to exactly what was just mentioned, that Zook's stack is better than this, and Waymo is better than this, and this stack is in between, and therefore I'm underwriting based on simulation, which is kind of interesting. Never before insurance industry underwrote based on simulations, and now they seemingly willing to do so. So that's the first factoid. The second factoid, I think the laws will differ drastically around the world. I think our attitude to safety in the United States is different even from Canada. And I think it's drastically different what the safety is in Japan and Europe. So you have cultures more focused on well-being of the society, and you have cultures more focused on well-being of individuals, more socialist and more libertarians. And I think those countries will be applying completely different criteria when they're judging which stack is safe and how a particular vehicle will behave in a difficult situation. Will it try to protect people inside the vehicle, sacrificing people on a bus stop, or it will sacrifice two people inside the vehicle, saving 10 children from a summer camp instead? And different societies will be making different moral judgments and will be applying different criteria.
Can I
Yeah.
just jump in on this? Because I think Alexei hit probably the most important point of
Yeah.
this podcast, perhaps, which is that in the US, we live in an individualistic society. And he hit the nail on the head. In Europe, Japan, other places, it's a collectivist society. So when we think about rating AV tech stacks, it's got to be universal. I think it's got to be global. Now, if we want to say, hey, our people are going to be less safe, that's fine. Let's make that decision. I think the insurance companies are going to focus on dollars and cents, right? Sort of like our attitudes towards climate change are very different, no matter who's president. But definitely when a Republican president is in, extremely different, like, the opposite of Europe. The reality is we're all going to suffer the same consequences, and the insurance companies are going to have to pay for the damages. So it's been interesting to see what's happened in Florida with liability. My aunt's place in South Palm Beach, she used to pay like $2,500 a year for insurance, and now it's $22,000 a year in the last few years. So look, you can say climate change isn't real, but the insurance companies don't give a shit. They're gonna charge you what their risk is, and I think it's gonna be the same thing with AVs, right? So if one company, their risk profile is, like let's say there's a score 1 to 100, and let's say Waymo's at 95, Zook's at 93. You have some of these other guys at 65. It'll be reflected in the cost to the consumer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they can make their own decisions.
Yeah.
Won't
Yeah.
your
I
risk
do
profile be
wonder
the
if
premium?
the insurance companies are the ones that will ultimately be the ones that decide what safety kind of means with dollars, right? And then
Well,
individuals can,
even if you self-insure,
yeah,
at the end of the day, it's still
yeah,
dollars, unless we're
right,
going to change our society and say you can't sue. And
yeah.
then people just aren't going to ride in the vehicles, right? But sorry, John, you're going to say something.
I was just saying it's, to me it sounds like the profile the rating system you're talking about will just be the end cost to the consumer.
Well, you could look at it that way. I'm thinking more about having a whole series of criteria. Um, yes, safety is probably the most important aspect, but there's also like, what are the impacts to the transit system? What are the impacts to other city services? I was talking to a friend of mine who ran the San Francisco DOT until recently. He's telling me a story about how these cruise vehicles would go into an intersection, and if there's a traffic control officer, right, they would brick because they didn't know what to do with the traffic control officer. And it would take 20 to 30 minutes to extract that vehicle from the intersection, get somebody out there, deal with it. There's a cost to that for everybody who's trying to travel, right? As well as their safety issues and lots of other things. So there's a whole bunch of different criteria, I think, that can be applied. Just like there would be if you're buying a vehicle, and you look at consumer reports.
Yeah, for sure. I also wonder too if part of the reason why there hasn't been more uptake from consumers on this is that even though I logically know that it's safer, or should be safer to let the car drive itself, the idea that I'm not in control, right? It makes it more terrifying. I think it's the same thing for people that are terrified of flying. It's not the actual, like, the fact that you're in the air that's terrifying, it's that you have handed over control to somebody else. Um, and that makes people really nervous. And so I think that's another big factor that is just really hard to get our arms around, and it's really easy to point to the edge cases where it didn't work and use that anecdotal evidence as supporting evidence for why you'll never get in an autonomous car, even though it's still safer, right?
Until you do, and then you're like, "Oh my god, this is amazing." Like,
Right.
if it's a good quality service, good tech stack, and you're like, "Oh my god, it's so much better than, like, the Uber driver, doesn't smell good and is, arguing with me," or whatever those issues are, and then people are like, there was an article yesterday about, people I forget where, but people are, like, canceling on Uber until they get to Uber Waymo, 'cause, Uber is the demand generation for Waymo in a few cities. I think it's Atlanta. And I thought that was interesting. So once people try it, if it's good, they seem to love it.
So I'm curious from your perspectives, who's winning the race? Where would you stack the companies that are out there?
It's hard to tell because we see only players in China, uh, and we don't know how they measure reliability and false negatives and false positives and forced disengagements, unforced disengagements. We have no idea what kind of toolkit they're using for to certify and deploy those vehicles. In the US, clearly Waymo has the most visibility, and what we see, I'm sure it's an amazing piece of engineering, knowing Waymo DNA from early Google days, as well as the sensor stack they're using. Tesla just launched their own vehicles. And for the full disclosure, I've been driving Tesla full self-driving for a long period of time. And I think it's an amazing technology. Definitely reduces your uh, mental load when you're driving long distances on the highway. I'm blown away how much easier it is to drive for 4 hours with Tesla full self-drive versus just holding the steering wheel all the time on my own. I don't know if those guys are ready or not. I haven't tried. But I think you raised one of the and clearly Zoox is a nobody knows what's happening out there. And Cruise was a high flying player, and then they kind of went sideways. And now Cruise is rehiring and people are coming back. And so it feels like they will restart the program because General Motors doesn't want to fall behind. And they want to keep fighting in this game. We have evolution of ADAS system, which are becoming level 3 plus, and maybe touching level 4. So a number of traditional OEMs have pretty good solutions. And then the question, your airplane flies and the rocket ship flies. Can you start with airplane and transition to rocket ship? Do you have enough smarts and enough technology developed through ADAS improvements to eventually allow full safe driving, or you still remain the very best airplane, which will never make this job to the orbit. I think the jury's still out. Another interesting jury is the sensor stack and Waymo versus Tesla, because clearly Elon is anti-LiDAR, at least publicly. And in our history, AutoTech Ventures would never invested in a LiDAR company. So we were kind of in Elon's camp. But if you really think about uh, the problem car makers are trying to solve, it's not a new problem. We just say it's autonomous vehicle, but all of us and the birds outside and this dog running around, they're autonomous creatures. The goal is to find prey and eat something and be fed and avoid being eaten. And you do it while having the, how to say, constrained energy budget. You are not unlimited budget. You have to you kill what you eat. You need to, or you eat what you kill, and you need to run after, chase, and grab, and digest, and still stay alive. And it's not a new problem. And the interesting thing is, different species over 3.5 billion years of evolution, they evolve differently. So in some extreme cases, you're maxing up your sensor stack, and you have bats, and you have owls, and you have some other creatures which have pretty small brain, but absolutely amazing sensor stack. And in other case, you have human beings, and our sensor stack is pretty bad, actually. It's shockingly bad. But we have a lot of processing power. And so the trade-off between a lot of sensing plus a little bit of processing power versus a lot of processing power and a little bit of sensing is not new. And the evolution created species in one way, and you have an opposite branch. And I have a joke that you have dolphins, and they have both, but they're water cooled. What dolphins do, you need to live in very forgiving environment, and then you can afford sonar as well as significant processing capabilities, and it will still feed the bill. And therefore, to say that LiDAR stack is intrinsically better than camera-based stack, I cannot tell you where manifestations would drive relatively well without any LiDARs, you and me. And we don't have high-definition maps, and we just know how to drive. If we're not distracted and we don't have hot coffee pouring in our labs, we're okay. And so the question, which approach will win, which technology will eclipse what the total cost of ownership is going to be, I think the jury is still out. On the other hand, if you talk to industry veterans, they're saying, yes, when LiDARs are expensive, it makes sense to build your stack based on low cost cameras and consumer electronic grade solutions. But if you believe in Moore's law and the fact that your compute as well as sensors will be dropping in price over time, then it's pretty easy to imagine vehicles with superhuman senses. Vehicles not only which can see in infrared and see heat, but can see through the walls with X-ray or gamma or terahertz radiation. We didn't evolve with those senses, but we already have sensors at the airports which can do amazing things. And every time you go to X-ray or MRI, those sensors are amazing. They're too expensive today. But I think the far future, I don't know who's going to win 2, 3, 4 years from now. I can tell you who's going to, what the sensor stack will look like 10, 15 years from now. I think 15 years from now, every vehicle will have cameras and thermal and X-ray and terahertz, because all those sensors will be like tens or maybe hundreds of dollars. And if you can fuse all the data together, if you can do low-level sensor fusion and create a holistic view of the world, I think it will drastically simplify computational load on your compute architecture. And it will avoid those vehicles with superhuman senses, definitely beat humans on how safe we are. And do some really early warning, slam the brake before something comes out from around the corner. I think we cannot do it, but our machines of the future should be able to do it. I'm a big believer.
I also wonder too if part of the challenge here is just getting vehicles to talk to each other. And if we could
Oh,
have
Oh,
devices and
what's
vehicles talk to each other,
oh,
that is a
that would
whole
reduce
other
a lot of this.
conversation, man. Cellular versus
it's
DSL.
a curveball. It's a curveball, Peter.
Or VDEX. Can I jump on? I'm with
Yeah. Go ahead,
you.
Gabe.
Go,
It's
Gabe.
a good one.
Because I think it's perfect you have us both on because we agree on a lot, but we come from a slightly different perspective. And I think what we've learned is there's a big difference between ADAS systems. I agree with Alexei. I have a Mercedes now with some autonomy features. I got rid of my Tesla. I miss autopilot. It was great. As an advanced highway ADAS system, it was amazing. It didn't function in the city very well, obviously. It's not for that. The full self-driving I thought was also very underpowered for the city. My car came with ultrasonic. I had a 2020 Model S, came with ultrasonic sensors, radar sensors, and the 8 cameras. Elon disengaged ultrasonic and radar at a certain point because I guess the car didn't have the compute power. I think it had a hardware 2 or hardware 3, I don't remember. And he didn't want this is look, the radar sensors are as little as $5 and the ultrasonic sensors are like as little as $100. It's not.
We actually sold a company to Tesla called DeepScale,
Yeah.
specifically dealing with low-level sensor fusion. And the challenge with radar is a multi-path reflection and very hard to annotate those images to say this is a human, this is the car, this is a goat, because nobody knows how to annotate radar reflections.
But here's the thing, right? You're right about that, obviously, and you know more than I do. That's why you need a sensor suite. And you got to have the compute power in the vehicle to support a sensor suite. So I went to vision only on my car, and literally it only worked 80% of the time because I live in the city. I live under a tree. A bird would shit on the front windshield. Actually, often the bird would crap on the left side. So the cameras on the left side wouldn't work. And then if the light was shining in the front camera wouldn't work, and it would notify me that I couldn't use the features. That that doesn't work. You can't have an
Full
iPhone.
disclosure, if the bird shits in my eye
Yeah.
and my second eye, I have sun, I'm not going to drive as well. So
Okay.
for the full disclosure, okay?
But Alexei, you said something interesting earlier about humans and animals being autonomous, right? And you're absolutely right. This is why this is such an interesting conversation. Well, I don't just rely on my eyes. Well, first of all, I have 2 eyes. I also have my hands. I can touch things. I have ears so I can hear. I have a whole sensor suite in my body. So when Elon says it can see as well as a human, I'm like, well, it better be able to do more than that. So LiDAR in my mind, we invested in Ouster uh, many years ago. I advised them. They're an excellent company. They've merged now with others, but the LiDAR is absolutely essential. I think it's absolutely essential. I think vision only is never going to work. It's never going to work because a human wouldn't work if it was vision only. It just doesn't work. It doesn't. You need the redundancy of a sensor suite. It's not a cost issue. It's a compute power issue and the programming that it takes to use those sensors. And I think fundamentally the issue here is you've got folks, and I didn't know the answer to this 10 years ago, but you've got folks like Waymo and Zoox, right? Neuro, like we're going to start at level 5 and that's it. Level 4 or 5, that's what we're going to do. And you have folks like GM, with Super Cruise, Tesla with autopilot and what they call full self-driving, saying, we believe that you're going to go from level 2 and it's going to be iterative and you're going to get to level 5. And I think they're at a real disadvantage because they make fundamental mistakes thinking that you can do that and iterate and thinking that you can rely on a limited set of sensors like just vision. It's never going to work.
The jury's still out, gentlemen. But I think we will see
I
autonomous
disagree.
vehicles.
I disagree. But
I love it.
have us back in like a year and let's talk more. See where things are at. I will bet Alexei $1. And you're gonna have to have LiDAR.
Let's discuss 5 years from now, because
Okay.
as I mentioned, 15 years from now, I agree with you full-heartedly. But it's a little bit like with OLED TVs and LCD, liquid crystal TVs. OLED is such an advantageous technology. In any way you analyze, slice and dice OLEDs, they're better. But traditional liquid crystal guys scaled infrastructure, and they built factories, and they dropped the cost so much that suddenly you have a vastly superior technology essentially remaining niche, and LCD guys controlling the market share everywhere in the world except for some very, very teeny tiny, highly specialized applications or absolutely high-end use cases. And so I think there is a non-trivial chance when you can just brutal force with substandard technology. I agree with you, it's substandard. But if you deploy aggressively and suddenly everyone hooked up, and it's substantially cheaper, including insurance, including liabilities, because a loan self-insures, at some point people will say, holy shit, he controls such a large market share that maybe for some niche, unique, high-end applications, you will have all the sensor suite you just mentioned. For everybody else, vision is good enough, especially if lawmakers will say, you know what, good enough is what a loan can deliver. I'm giving you an alternative view of the future. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying it's the jury's still out. I think it will be interesting to reconnect 2 or 3 years from now and sync up on this particular evolution of autonomous space.
I learned that vision is enough on the highway during the day. I did. It works. I had Tesla I have had 2 Teslas since 2018. At night, when it's foggy, when it's raining, doesn't work. Doesn't work. So, I mean, even for like trucking on the highway,
But I don't work as well in night and the foggies. I just don't drive. I'm like, dude, I'm not driving. It's too dangerous. And maybe if you put criteria, this thing is as good as an average human. Yay! If you put it, it's like Michael Schumacher in at his prime plus superhuman senses, then clearly people relying on vision will not make a cut. It's just where the policymakers set it up, and I don't know how it's going to play out.
well, and if we get to the point where we have AV lanes, like let's say we have HOV 3+ AV lanes or trucking lanes, that's a different ballgame, right? Because one of the issues we have is context sensitivity here. And like you brought up off-road farm equipment, uh, totally different context than highway, totally different context than very complex urban environment or suburban environment. And so I can definitely see a world where vision only in AV only lanes, even in cities, is plausible. I think in the complex environment, nighttime, all of those things, it gets dicey. But, and that's where like when I think of this rating system, I'm thinking specifically like about urban environment.
So, Gabe, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I want to make sure we have some time for some other topics. But I am curious to get your perspective on why we don't have AV lanes today. It seems like that is a fairly obvious thing to have. And almost every single car that comes out today has some level of autonomy built into it, right? Even if it's as simple as, basic lane keeping.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're going to have AV only lanes soon in like an urban context, but I could certainly see it as a mixed like HOV on the highway. The fact is we don't have a lot of AVs right now. So there's not really a need for it necessarily. But you've got like Cavenue that's been working on connected vehicle lanes in Michigan. I think you'll have like tolls, like toll lanes meet AV lanes, meet trucking lanes, meet HOV lanes. In the urban context, you could take a bus rapid transit lane and you could make it a high occupancy AV lane as well for like AV shuttle. You could definitely add AVs complementing transit, linking bus stops to uh, train stops, and it could be very, very useful. Like there's these great use cases for autonomy where like if you work with cities, I think cities will step up and say, hey, we're open to giving you your own lane. If you can do X, Y, and Z, yeah, let's do it. But it's got to be like a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. So
it's a very good point, and I think there is a lot of cross talk or an analogy between vehicle-to-vehicle communications and what you just mentioned. If the government can force V2X, V2V standard, it will make roads safer. There is no doubt about it. And in some European countries, it's already been implemented in Asian countries too. And so there's a clear advantage. However, the question who's going to pay for it? And so if you want to deploy V2V and V2X, somebody needs to build the infrastructure, empower the infrastructure, and support the infrastructure. And it looks like some societies are willing to invest because it makes life safer. In some societies, they're saying, no, I'm libertarian or liberal, or my private preferences exceed the societal needs, and therefore I don't want to be taxed, and I don't want to invest, and I don't want my country to deploy this particular solution. And so, Gabe, I wonder how cities and federal traffic agencies will deal with dedicated lines specifically for AVs. I spiritually want to see it. I want it to happen. I'm getting a little bit skeptical that US will be on the forefront of those deployments. I think we should be relying, and our view of the world, at least my view of the world, like us humans, we're self-sufficient drivers. I don't rely on anything when I make my decisions left or right. I think the presumption for US should be all those autonomous vehicles will be making their own decisions, and they will not be getting any help from anybody else. Like, oh, communicate around the corner what's coming. Like, no, I'm on my own. It's live free or die, a little bit of New Hampshire to you. But
yes.
yeah, all the vehicles will have to make their own decisions for quite a while.
Yes. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I've been a skeptic of Vita X technology for 15 years. Nobody could agree, it seemed like, on DSRC versus cellular. And you got the FCC that regulates the radio spectrum for Vita X, and there's a conflict actually with the FAA. And so there, I mean, it's actually a legitimate problem. I think that's where folks like Elon and others are right, is that like the vehicle's got to function on its own and within a network of vehicles, right? So cars can talk to each other, and particularly in-network vehicles can talk to each other. We do it now to some extent with peer-to-peer, like Waze and Google, and where it's like, hey, there's an accident here, you let everybody know. It's just going to be automated. And yeah, I don't see cities or anybody paying for sensors to be embedded in infrastructure anytime soon, particularly if they have to be linked to the cell network, unless it's
But
really
Singapore
cheap.
may be different. In Zurich might be different, and Stuttgart might be different. It just you will have very different approach to safety and what safety is and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And clearly, guys in mining and construction, they're perfectly fine placing the base stations and providing centralized control over different vehicles, in addition to each vehicle being autonomous or almost autonomous. And so different deployment models, they result in different architectures and different ROIs and different scale-up challenges, but also opportunities. But it will stay with public road. I agree with you full-heartedly.
So as we wrap up, this has been a really fun conversation. I'm curious for each of you, I mean, this whole podcast is the venture capital podcast, right? So it's like, where are the big opportunities going forward? I'd love to hear from each of you. What is one area within autonomy that you think is ripe for disruption or a really interesting opportunity to invest in? What should our listeners be keeping an eye on, especially maybe stuff that's not obvious?
Alex, you go first.
Sure, thank you. My intuition tells me the highway autonomy or public road autonomy game is pretty much over for venture capitalists. And you have 3 or 4 or 5 exceptionally well-capitalized companies. And it's like the Game of Thrones. If you cannot build army big enough, you'd better join another army because you have no chance in any frontal collision with somebody else who's well-funded, well-researched, and has 10 years behind their shoulders. And so my intuition tells me the highway autonomy, it's too late to enter for any startup or any small, medium-sized venture capital firm like AutoTech Ventures. We are investors in multiple AFAB companies. And so SafeAI, one of our companies, just got acquired by Pronto. We are investors in Autonomy, which provides solutions to agricultural OEMs. They announced a big deal with Kubota and Bobcat, and they have many more deals they're going to announce shortly. And so turning small and medium-sized tractors into fully autonomous vehicles. We are investors in Fox Robotics, forklifts, and loading and offloading 18-wheelers. And so if you think about all sorts of yard automation, yard management system, ports, how to move all the containers, airports, you're moving lorries and moving cargo between planes. So all those niche cases, I think for $500 million VC firm like AutoTech, those are attractive opportunities, and there are plenty of those subdomains where people hear about labor shortages and cost of labor and liabilities and everything else. Another interesting aspect is like more than autonomy itself, but somebody needs to clean autonomous cars. Somebody needs to recharge, refuel autonomous cars. Somebody needs to provision and fleet manage autonomous cars. Somebody needs to insure autonomous cars. Somebody needs to repair and maintain autonomous cars. At what point autonomous cars will go and ask for help from, like, my tire is flat. Okay, what do you do with my tire is flat? And so in addition to just thinking about autonomous, you start thinking what kind of infrastructure has to be deployed and has to be created in order to support wide deployments of autonomous, how to fuel them, okay? And who's going to do it. And that's where we are actively looking and exploring.
I love it. Gabe, quick thoughts on what you're
Yeah.
excited about as we wrap?
I agree with Alexei. Like, we invested in autonomy back in the day. Those types of investments are not happening anymore. It's the subcomponents. Like Ouster, was shot way up, went way down. I've held my shares. It went down to $6. Now it's at $30 today. I think the subcomponents are going to be really, really important. And I think that EV charging, I see Hugh Gordon is joining. EV charging for these vehicles and the services for the vehicles will be essential.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you, Gabe and Alexei. Really appreciate having you guys on the podcast today.
Wonderful.
Sounds great.
Thank you for having us.
All right.